Every video and episode of the It's Cavalier podcast is made possible by my supporters over on Patreon. If you enjoy the show here today, consider signing up. You'll get early access, exclusive videos, podcasts, member shoutouts, and more. And as always, thank you for watching. Welcome to another edition of the It's Cavalier podcast. It's your boy Mack, and joining me tonight on this late night edition is Luca, aka RealCavsFans. How you doing, man?
Good. I appreciate the intro. If I want to know what it feels like to walk out to a stadium with like your pump up music, I feel like that's what those jams are.
That's about as generic as it gets, I suppose. It's going to be retooled over the course of the 2025-26 offseason period, which has ironically just kicked off. I mean, we just watched the eighth different champion in the eighth straight year, if I'm not mistaken, which is pretty cool and speaks to the parity that we kind of have in the league right now. But with that being the case, man, now you see teams scrambling to kind of shift some things and maybe shed some salary. And that is exactly what we have seen today with some of the moves that the Boston Celtics have made. What were your initial thoughts on both of those moves, man?
First of all, I think Joe Dumars got a little bit bored playing 2K and plus pressing the trade button. Really want to do something in real life because that's
the trade finder.
I think someone commented in one of the sections like, "Am I supposed to care about this trade? Like, what does it really mean?" And that's kind of how I felt. Not to be, crude in any way, but it was really one of those deals where you couldn't really figure out what the whole point of it was. I'm just thankful that Joe Dumars is still in the league. Hopefully, the Cavs can do some business with him because back when he was at the Pistons, he had a few good years, but certainly didn't end well. But some of the moves they're making, it seems like teams are wanting to get out of the kind of that bottom dweller status and really try to be competitive, which you can appreciate, but hard to understand kind of what the Pelicans are doing, and only Joe Dumars knows, which is a scary thing. Otherwise, I think the Celtics is really interesting. Seeing how they're choosing to navigate the second apron, which they were able to handle, but in doing so got worse by doing that.
Yeah.
Now, taking a step back here, that's maybe a part of the plan. But I think the first trade to trade away Holiday and really, from a archetype perspective, change what they're good at to go in the complete opposite direction. Their point of attack defense with Holiday and White, that was a strength, allowing those two to do the dirty work, allow Tatum and Brown more freedom, both offensively, defensively, set the table for them. Now you completely shift that, have a guy who can attack more defensively, who puts more pressure on Brown and Tatum potentially defensively. Now, Holiday really dragged down the Celtics last few years. They actually were better with Holiday off the floor than they were on, even with his defensive skills. And Simon's a much better offensive player who you're hoping that in a better environment can be a better defender. But as is the case for a lot of those talented scorers, it's how can I channel that into being productive and efficient when it matters most, which I think is the kind of the leap we've been hoping Simons would take, but really hasn't. So we'll see what that happens, but it's just a complete shift from what they've been really good at to now is that strength not really a weakness.
Do you think all of that is geared towards just kind of punting on the 2025-26 season as Tatum is likely to miss basically the entire year, so we're not likely to compete anyway, so I guess we should go ahead and ship off some of these pieces and get under the second apron to some capacity? Do you think more of that was about, okay, we don't really care necessarily what the return is, we just want to be able to shed that salary? Or do you think that they really made these moves with competing this upcoming season in mind?
Did the Celtics get better after today?
I certainly don't think so. No, I mean, I think the goal was pretty clear, but I just wanted to confirm that on your end.
Yeah, I think that's certainly a fair perspective to share. As far as, if you look at it, George Niang is not Kristaps Porzingis. He may turn to Big Baby Davis, but he's not Kristaps Porzingis.
Sorry, George.
love Georges, but let's be real. And Simon certainly can be an upgrade, but in the end, it's certainly a much different looking team. And I think it's certainly interesting to see also too how other teams start to handle that. Does Indiana share a similar perspective where they really haven't been a tax-paying team? Do they share a similar perspective, especially with the 2026 draft pick coming back? Shout out Joe Dumars to them. Do they now decide, hey, let's take a step back here this year? I know Mathurin and Toppin are up for discussion as far as extensions go. Do they take a similar approach? Not necessarily tearing it down, but like already knowing and not going and expecting they're not going to be as good, but just being realistic about their chances, but also about that repeater clock and what that does in so many years. I think what this apron structure does more than anything else is, one, it causes the NBA to be more cyclical. Those long-term dynasties of really carrying that salary can happen, but it's probably going to be much, much less because of these restrictions that are imposed, and we're seeing the Celtics react to that. But it's also requiring quicker, more decisive decisions. I know, like Kobe in his postseason press conference kind of mentioned, well, the Celtics took them a while to break through. It took the Nuggets a while to break through. If that was under a different structure, those times literally could afford, in financial terms, to wait. Now teams really don't have that same type of affordability to wait unless you have an owner willing to pay whatever, whenever. But we've even seen Steve Ballmer, now the Celtics group, even have a limitation of what they're willing to pay, even the Warriors. So I think it's requiring quicker, more decisive action we're going to continue to see, and we're already seeing.
Yeah, I mean, Cleveland is in this rare situation, I kind of believe, where they've already kind of locked these guys up long term, and they're going to be faced eventually with the reality of having to pivot just by the nature of how this thing is structured. But I don't think it behooves them just to make a move to keep up with the proverbial Joneses, as you're seeing teams like Orlando kind of push some of the chips in and go out and acquire a Desmond Bane. By the way, do you think that moves the needle for them over in
It moves the
Orlando?
needle. I'd say more on par with the Cavs. I don't think past.
And we have seen Kevin Durant. I think that was the biggest name this summer so far on the move to Houston. Do you think that has solved their issues over there in Phoenix, or do you think their problems are just getting started taking on that salary of Jalen Green, in addition to still having Bradley Beal and Devin Booker's 53 mil apiece on the books?
I would. It's almost reminiscent of David Kahn and the Minnesota Timberwolves collecting point guards. Now the Phoenix Suns are in the business of collecting shooting guards. Emphasis on shooting. That structure. Not sure it's how it's going to work, but again, I think we're seeing them probably willing to take a step back in order to deal with the mess that was left after Kevin Durant left, which seems to be a theme. We'll see how it works out for Houston. But it seemed to be a theme for what they're willing to do to achieve their end goal, which is getting in a better financial flexibility standpoint, if it means taking a step back or potentially having to shift and make another move to get where they want to go. So a lot of these dominoes are falling. I think you're seeing more financially motivated decisions. Now, Phoenix and Houston was a little bit different because Durant kind of forced his hand with where he wanted to go, kind of dangling that proverbial carrot of his contract extension, saying, don't trade for me because I'm not going to re-sign with you, which we've seen every star do when they're at that point if they're in those rumors. Jimmy Butler did the same thing, last year. So it's not uncommon for that to happen, but it certainly changed the perspective of what the Suns got in return.
I think that's fair. Also, in relation to that, right, we heard that Cleveland was one of the wild card teams that was potentially involved in some of those discussions. How much of that do you actually buy? Because I'm not sure, like, in terms of reliable sourcing, that's one thing, but I'm not sure how deep the Cavaliers actually got into these discussions and what was actually offered to Phoenix. I know that Darius Garland's name was thrown out there. What is your take on all that?
I think Wendy on ESPN Cleveland kind of tried to toe the line today as far as saying, well, was it offered? Was it just discussed? Was it, was it insinuated? Well, maybe if you allow this to happen, then we'll think of, that's, I think there's that kind of nuanced line because ultimately NBA players have Twitter, NBA players read the news. When they see their names in headlines, I'm sure they're going to feel some type of way. So, I'm sure within all that, teams try to be protective of how they approach things. I think from one perspective, you can look at it and say the Cavs are actively trying to improve, and they're looking and investigating every single situation like they should. Whether or not it would have gotten down that route, you would have had to deal with the two owners, which we know don't like each other. You would have had to find a third team to take on salary because they're two second apron teams, meaning neither of them can take on more salary and more than 100% they're sending out, and that's not possible dealing directly with one another. So you would have to find another team. You would also have to deal with the consequences of getting under the second apron to aggregate to get Durant, which would require more. So there's a lot of other things that had to get down the road. But I think if you start at the very beginning and say, are they willing to do what's needed in their eyes to improve, the answer may be yes. So it's interesting to see kind of how that takes shape here over the next several weeks, because again, GMs don't always tell the truth. We know that. But Kobe said in his press conference, he said, if I really wanted to pivot, that time would have been last year. So does that change? And what he said really still the same as it is today? Maybe not.
I mean, he was never going to come out at the end of the season press conference to say anything else other than that, though, Luke. I suppose. I mean, I think he kind of had to say, I believe in the core four, basically, at that point. But yeah, it's a long offseason and a lot can change. A lot of offers can be thrown out. A lot of different players can become available. And I think, to me, it was mostly the Cavaliers doing their due diligence on a player of Kevin Durant's caliber. I mean, when a player like that becomes available, you at least, touch base, see what can happen, see what they could be made available for, and if there would be any interest there. Now, I guess my line of thinking in regard to that is Darius Garland, Jarrett Allen, all of these guys, well, both of these guys rather, have been through trade rumors. Right? I mean, they've been through the rumor mill. They've heard their names been mentioned in, I think, back-to-back postseasons, well, back-to-back off seasons now. I always, just from a personal standpoint, I always wonder, hey, if my team is, if I'm reading rumors, if I'm seeing stuff on social media that my name is being mentioned in trade, in hypothetical trades, and my team may or may not be willing to move me to get said player, I always wonder how the player feels on just a personal level. You see, Jarrett has been in a lot of these, but Darius in particular, it feels like the steam has started to pick up over this past year or so. Do you think that may or may not impact his his mindset entering the 2025-26 season?
I think that depends on his relationship with Kobe. I think Jared's over in Japan. I don't even know if he has social media, so I think he's probably chilling. Yeah. I don't think he cares about what we're saying. I think he's more concerned about other things outside of basketball, which is fine, which is probably good in this case, right?
Yeah.
But I think with Darius, I think there's certainly a different situation. Certainly when you have Clutch representing you, that involves a whole new dynamic. They're as plugged in and as sensitive to anything as any agency in the league, and they know that, and they know they have the power to make a change if needed. We dealt with Darius trade rumors last year. Whether or not they were true, they turned out not to be true. He dealt with that last year, so he deals with it again this year. How's that going to impact him? I think that comes down to the relationship him and Kobe have. Is it a truthful, transparent one where he knows he can go to Kobe and Kobe's telling him the right thing? I think that's what it comes down to. So if he has the support of Kobe, if he has the support of Donovan, ultimately, then it's probably something they can get through. If he doesn't, if there's a fracture there, I think that's when you may see some doubt as far as where he feels like he stands within perspective of everything. With fairness to him, I don't think anyone had to say he was offered in a Durant deal to know that he was offered. So, I mean, if the math ain't mathing without Darius.
Yeah, the cap hits. I mean, you just look from a pure numbers perspective. There were only maybe one of three players that could make the math work.
There's only one. Oh, yeah. Outside, I'm not including Donovan or Evan.
Yeah,
they're off the table. But
yeah.
Yes, in that case, three. But outside of them, yeah, it's only one. I mean, if you tried to move not Darius, you try to keep Darius, Donovan, Mobley, and Durant. I think that was about 186 million for just those four players, and 207 million is a second apron, which they would have been hard capped at. So you would have had 21 million to fill out those rest of those roster spots, but just isn't possible. Just by mathing it, you can already tell if there were discussions that went down the road, it had to include Darius. Not even from a perspective they wanted to give him up. That's just what had to happen in order to enact that type of transaction. And that's the same thing for a Giannis situation. You can swap out Durant, plug in Giannis, same thing. In order for them to make that move, they have to move at least one of Donovan, Darius, or Evan if something like that comes out. Not saying it would, not saying they'll even be in the running, or not saying they'll request a trade, but any of those large situations are going to require a large return financially. Doesn't mean talent-wise, but financially at the very least to make things match because of where the Cavs are at. And the one thing I'll mention too that is the most difficult thing about getting to where they want to get to is the aggregation. So in order
Yeah.
to combine two players to amount to another player, is aggregation, which is not allowed in the second apron. You have to get below that amount in order to do that. So it's about 12.8 million they have to clear in order to aggregate. But the consequence of aggregating is hard capping at the second apron, meaning
Yes.
they cannot cross the second apron for any particular reason. If they want to sign a veteran free agent, want to sign a draft pick, they want to use bird rights on Merrill Jerome, they cannot do that. So once you get below the second apron, you're okay, but then you have to clear even more salary to then just fill out your roster with appropriate players. So that's kind of the domino effect of, okay, they can probably get under the ag rate if they really needed to, and they were willing to pay to, but then you have to deal with the other consequences that you start dwindling down your assets and what your flexibility is, and it makes it hard. So that's why some of those discussions are more nuanced as far as just saying, can they or can't they do it? It's a yeah, but discussion, and at what cost?
See, I think a lot of the confusion here stems from the aggregation of it all. For the people out there who may not be familiar, I got a question for you because this is always something that I'm seeing, and I'm hoping that you can shed light on it for the people who don't have a fair understanding of it. If you are making a deal, if you're Cleveland, as long as the salary gets you under the second apron, can you combine salaries to trade for a set player? Like, let's say you're going to trade Isaac Okoro, Mack Strus, and Jalen Tyson to match salaries for some big salary out there. If you get under the apron and do that, is that legal under the current CBA? Because there's a lot of moves out there that I'm seeing where that is the case.
So the key part of that is apron compliance is post-transactional.
Okay.
So as long as you end whatever transaction you're trying to complete in the apron appropriate for the said move, then you're good. So in that case, the Cavs can start a deal in the second apron, but by the end of that deal, if they end and are below the second apron while aggregating, that's all good. You just don't have to deal with the consequences of the hard cap after that because of the other rules. So that's a
You're on
difficulty.
vet minimums after that. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's the reality. I think that's one of the things that it's going to be interesting to see is how Kobe approaches that. Is to what extent or to what threshold do they have tolerance for the second apron? Because that's really going to drive their decisions how much money they want to cut. But you're not just in a lot of these deals. If you're looking to aggregate and enact a hard cap, by doing so, you then have to decide, okay, is Strus and Okoro worth X, while also likely losing Merrill and Jerome and maybe others while doing so. So it's not just a simple, straightforward equation. There's also unintended consequences that are a result of the shrapnel from that move.
Yeah, whole domino effect takes place. And that begs the question, is it worth it? Because you see so many different people out there say, "Oh, we got to get tough. We got to move Jarrett. He's soft as shit. We got to get Darius out of here. He's not a playoff riser. He's been injured in all of these postseason runs." It begs the question, is it worth it to move these guys this offseason? And what would you do it for? What would Kobe Altman and company be comfortable moving off of one of these core four pieces for? And so I hate to put you on the spot, man, but for these two players, I'll just ask you, for Darius, what would have to be the price in your opinion? And then following that, what would Jarrett's price be for you?
You're asking me like I have an app in my notes where I keep all the prospective trade options on there, and I'm looking at it right now that I've gone through exhaustively to see what deals I would do. I don't have anything like that. I think part of the problem with the discussion is that when it comes to Allen and Garland, that worth is so subjective. What those are such divisive players. I think everyone can agree on Mitchell and Mobley and their value and see them as cornerstones and know their worth. There may be some variance, but for the most part, there's a pretty clear alignment on what those players' values is. For Allen and for Garland, when you say what is it worth it to you, my worth may be completely different to another person's worth because of how I view Darius or Jarrett in the perspective of the team when it comes to consequences on the road. So I think it's a very difficult thing to do. I think one of the difficult things of that conversation is because of limited, and I'll get to it, I promise, because of limited runs that they have asset-wise to attain different things, and they still have needs out there outside of just potentially moving that.
Yeah, there are
Is you
flaws.
trade, you trade Allen, you then need a center too. So in any deal, you either have to get a center back, in addition to that rotation, being a rotation player probably, Or if you don't get that back in a deal, you have to have another deal lined up to get that center when the Cavs are already asset strapped. So I think that's one of the other difficulties of that is you have to be ready to get what you need in that deal or another deal have lined up with it. I think for Allen, I always thought Houston, New Orleans, um, even the Lakers begrudgingly. I mean, I think those are options that could be intriguing if the right combination of players were offered. Looking at Darius, I think you certainly need some type of playmaker in return. Now, what your level or threshold for playmaker is may be a little bit different, but I think some type of dynamic player where you're not putting it all on Mitchell to be that guy moving forward, something like that needs to be in return. So, not sure that player was. I thought potentially New Orleans might be a destination for him as well because some of the pieces they have, I think they line up for both of the teams. But with Darius, you can get burned less by trading Allen than you can for Darius. I think one of the undercurrents of Darius too is you don't know what's going to happen with Mitchell, and whether you want to admit it or not, Darius is a safety net to what Donovan does, either just injury wise, play wise, or just contract wise. You can't move that, or I guess you can, but there's a large risk of moving that and not having another long-term option lined up to run with Mobley should things not work out with Mitchell. Now, it's not saying you need to plan for the worst case scenario all the time, but that's what GMs do, right? There's some sort of risk you have to take on any move. There's no doubt about that. But one of the greatest assets Darius provide is the short-term and long-term flexibility to pivot if they need to because of the uncertain future with Mitchell. So that's also a difficult thing with Darius is that archetype, that talent and that age is much harder to recover from than it is for Allen.
Yeah, I think both of them have their strengths, both of them have their weaknesses. They add to this Cavaliers team in different ways. I think in terms of the overlap between the backcourt and the front court, you can probably get away with moving Jarrett Allen and feel confident. Hey, we'll figure the rebounding of it all out. We'll figure out how to compensate on the defensive end as we slide Evan Mobley over to the 5, or if we bring in a veteran big or somebody else that's capable of playing a solid amount of minutes in a playoff series at the 5 alongside Evan Mobley. There are definitely different price tags associated with each, which make it difficult. And with some of the moves that we've already seen, like New Orleans, that was thought of as being one of the bigger trade partners that Cleveland could potentially have. Orlando too, right? And in regards to the whole Jalen Suggs deal before they traded traded for Desmond Bane and whatnot. And so you're seeing some of these potential teams that have a need at starting point guard that can afford to take on the salary that Darius has. I think you're starting to see some of these options dry up. And that's not to say that we can't see a move come out of nowhere, because a lot of these moves that the Cavaliers have made over the years, a lot of the moves that Kobe Altman has made, they've just kind of happened. There's not always been a build up and a lead up to it. I mean, there are definitely cases where there has been. I like to think that the Karis LeVert, George Niang deal for DeAndre Hunter, everybody knew that was, something was getting ready to happen with Karis, with his deal getting ready to expire. And there have been others, but I feel like Kobe kind of moves and operates in silence. And if a deal is going to happen, we're just going to wake up to it. Just like I kind of did the other day with some of these other moves that we've seen. But in my opinion, I mean, they're working with such a finite amount of assets. They're working with a limited amount of interest and so far as what we've seen in regards to these guys, that I think it's becoming increasingly likely that we see the core 4 as I like to think of them. I know a lot of people have taken that designation and status off of Jarrett Allen, but I still view them as a core 4 as of now. And I think we will see them likely return next season, barring some deal that comes out of nowhere. And I guess that begs the question, how do you improve along the margins? We know that they have some draft picks that they're going to have to make. On Friday, if no deal is made to get into the first round, we know that they're going to have to make some decisions in regards to Ty Jerome and Sam Merrill, one of which I think we're going to lose. I don't think we're going to keep both. So if you are faced with the situation, Luca, and having to retain this core and build along the margins, what do you think the biggest flaws on this roster are as of right now?
So I don't think you're alone in your core four sentiment. We ran a poll this week. I was just curious, how does everyone feel about the Knicks, Celtics, Magic, and Cavs core? I think that percentage was 83% still preferred the Cavs core the next 2 years. So, which I was even surprised about based off of how the comments tend to run these days. Ultimately, I think Kobe's belief in the core four is either going to be his greatest strength or greatest weakness. It's going to get him extension or get him fired. I don't think
Luka,
really
it's just because of what we just witnessed, right? It's because Halliburton, he's going to be out all next season. Similar situation over in Boston, and so you're looking at some of these other cores, like what happens with the Knicks over the next 2 seasons. You got Orlando kind of on the come up, so. I think that's why people have seen what has happened, and they've seen that 8 different teams have won in the last 8 years. And you're like, okay, what we have isn't that bad in the grand scheme of things. We could get better. We could move one of these guys, but if you had to run him back, it's not the worst thing in the world.
No, so I've been thinking about this. So it feels like kind of how Kobe operates trade-wise is almost similar to the Indians, where the Indians the Guardians. I apologize. Lifelong Cleveland fan, so sometimes it still slips up. But Chris Antonetti and the Guardians always feel like they have to win a trade in order to make a trade. Kobe kind of feels that same way, where any of the trades you look when he made them, or even looking back upon, you're like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Like there wasn't kind of that borderline where like, I don't know, that was a really risky trade. Maybe the Donovan trade, but trading for a prime player, and at that point, I think you can probably justify that. But I think now to this point where he's at a point where really the clock's on. There's no more time to wait. It's really upon him to improve at the level that they need to do quickly. And you've seen a lot of these teams recently, whether it be the Knicks, the Magic, the Celtics with Holiday and Porzingis, really be aggressive and be willing to take more risks. Even the Thunder here recently to achieve the result they feel like they could get to. Does Kobe have that in him, or does he really feel that this is the best option of sticking with what they have? Some of that we may not know because it's hard to say who's being offered, who's available. But as far as, improving upon what they have, I think there's really 2 key things that they need to figure out. One is what's their third big situation. They've
no more Dean Wade. No, I mean, sorry, Dean. I don't listen. Let me just say this. I'm sorry for cutting you off. I don't mind if the Cavaliers. I know there's a lot of talks right now about Dean and Isaac being moved, and Dean probably being easier to move than Isaac, but it is very likely that we see one of these guys return. And in no way am I saying if Dean Wade returns that I'm going to be pissed. I just don't want to see Dean Wade being utilized as that pseudo third big. So I'm sorry. I just had to put that out there.
No, you stole my thunder. Hopefully the aggregators get you and say you'll be pissed if Dean Wade returns. I mean, that's what I heard. But no, I mean they've been relying on him since Kevin Love left. That's been 3 years. Obviously, George Niang is in there as well. But they've relied on him time and time again, and it's no fault of Dean. It just he may not be cut out for that just based off of health and other reasons. I think even his shots disappeared in the playoffs. So can you consistently count on that? Personally, that thin behind Mobley and Allen when the guards are so dependent, the way that they build the guards are so dependent on the big to do what they do, to be that thin up front and potentially risk one of them going down and losing everything, I think that necessitates a third big more than anything. So that trying to find that if they can, it's really difficult just because of the type of player that's required. And, maybe it requires moving Strus if they plan to start Hunter. There's only so many salaries they can afford. So that's maybe some discussion that they have. But I think if they can achieve that, that would be a huge win. But ultimately, no matter where they go, whether it's third big, whether it's second point guard, whether it's more wing players, they just simply need more two-way players to be able to produce in the playoffs. It's hard to predict how someone's going to produce in the playoffs, but Okoro, Wade, others, they really have not shot the ball well enough, which has kind of been a conundrum because back when we had JB, it was Chetty could score, but he couldn't defend, and then now it's Wade and Okoro can defend, but they can't shoot. So they just need to find at least 1 or 2 dependable players they can bring off the bench that they know they can get production from, be able to plug into lineups. So whatever they can do to do that, I think those are the 2 things: is finding a third big or finding more productive two-way players when it comes to the playoffs, because what they've had for the last 2 or 3 years, it just simply hasn't been good enough.
Yeah, I remain a fan of Dean and Isaac, but there comes a time when you just have to admit that something is just not working. And that's coming probably from one of the biggest Isaac Okoro fans around. I have already advocated for many moves regarding Isaac. So in the off chance that he listens to this, it's nothing personal, man. It's just the production hasn't been there. And the same can be said for Dean. I mean, we're talking about a guy who has been an absolute no-show in postseasons for Cleveland. I mean, he's shooting he shot 24% in the playoffs career. It just, and I know basically everybody shot poorly against Indiana. That happened. So I'm trying to add some context in there. But I think there comes a time when you just can't be reliant on guys like Dean and Isaac to contribute if you're trying to win a championship. And then that goes doubly if you're trying to use them in certain ways, i.e. as a third big. And I know that DeAndre Hunter, he played a lot of his minutes at power forward this year. I'm hoping that he starts next year, but that's a whole nother conversation within itself. As far as some of those two-way guys go, I'm hoping that, and when you say two-way, I'm thinking that you're talking about playing on both sides of the ball. Jalen Tyson, I'm hoping that they give him a real opportunity to be in the rotation next year. I'm still a fan of Naquan Tomlin and what he brings to the table. The jury's still out on Emoni Bates and Luke Travers. Still a huge fan of him, but I mean, there's a lot of development that needs to take place. But I think the one thing that this CBA has made apparently clear is that you're going to have to lean on some of your in-house talent and some of that internal development to take place to make up for some of the salaries that you may have to ship out and some of that talent, some of that top-end talent that you may have to ship out. And so this leads me to my next question. If the Cavaliers are unable to convince Ty Jerome to sign on the dotted line, or if he plays elsewhere during the 2025-26 season, how confident are you that Craig Porter Jr., if you just roll into next season, that Craig Porter Jr. can pick up that role?
That's a toss of the coin. I think if that does happen, there should be another move, kind of a safety net, whether it's a veteran, coming in a veteran minimum, whether it's Malcolm Brogdon or Kyle Lowry, or just someone that provides some stability just in case. I think that's definitely needed. Now, the good thing is between Mitchell and Garland, even if you empower Mobley more, some of that playmaking void can be filled. They can do maybe something different with Jerome. Like if Jerome leaves, one of the things that they lacked was some point of attack defense. We saw how important that was in the playoffs, especially with the Thunder and the Pacers, even the Celtics, back when they won. That's something that's becoming more increasingly important as teams get more perimeter and skill reliant. So maybe that's a way to pivot for the better. But ultimately, to go with Craig, love Craig. I certainly think he can bring perhaps some of that. But the one thing that, at least personally, that been a little bit disappointed is his overall feel for the game. I think going back to last year, you saw JB get kind of frustrated with him at times, where just the flow of the game is maybe too fast. Or wasn't quite grasping, kind of getting everyone involved, slowing the pace down, changing the pace, getting in the sets. That just wasn't there consistently enough. Where some teams would go on runs when he'd get in the game or when he'd be in there, and it just wasn't really clicking for him. And even this year, I think sometimes just kind of that tunnel vision, trying to transition form, just worrying about me and worrying about the team. I think that transition sometimes can take longer for point guard. So hopefully it does click, especially being in the second year Kenny system. But just in case it doesn't, I think just some of those feel and instinctual things what concerns me, as well as what that shot eventually looks like. Now he improved this year, and in college he was a pretty decent shooter, but if you can't shoot, then it also changes that perspective of what that looks like. So that's why I say, because those things are those two things are so critical, and those are kind of unknown with him, there needs to be some type of stopgap for Craig, whether it be a veteran minimum or moving Wade or someone else to kind of backfill and provide a safety gap.
I think you hit the nail right on the head. I mean, the one thing that I wanted to see him improve on this year, and we saw some of it during summer league, where he was, he was letting the shots fly, and we've seen it in some of the garbage minutes that he has been a part of, is that perimeter shot, right? And the percentage, it says that he shot 43.8% this year, but when you look at the volume, it's it's less than an attempt. So is it really an improvement? And then the overall feel for the game, as you said, I think that is a heavy component of what he has to continue to improve upon. And just me, this is just my personal opinion, so people can take it for whatever they want. If we're going into next season with solely Craig Porter Jr. as your lead guard off the bench, that is not something that I feel entirely comfortable about. I think you have to, especially after watching how Indiana made it basically a necessity for you to have a good number of guys who could dribble, get the ball past half court and had the ability to beat the press. I think it would behoove them to at least have 4 different capable ball handlers at that guard position. And if you lose Ty, man, you might be SOL if you can't convince a Malcolm Brogdon or a Kyle Lowry or you acquire Alonzo Ball or something like that. There is a lot of different avenues they could take to address that. But if Ty doesn't return, solely relying on Craig Porter Jr. is not something that I would feel totally confident. Like, I want to see what he has, and make no mistake, I believe that this is kind of a make or break year for him in terms of will he make the Cavs rotation or not. But I don't want to throw all my eggs in that basket. And I hope for anybody listening, I hope you're not taking that as me not believing in Craig. I want to have a bit of a backup plan in place.
Yeah, you're making a lot of enemies on this podcast, it sounds like.
I know people are going to hate me after this episode.
No, and I think that's also life of a team in the second apron too. Is like you can't have a safety net for everything. You have to choose who you want to pay, and there's going to be some projections that have to happen. Whether it be Tyson stepping in for Okoro, whether it be Porter stepping in for Jerome if he leaves, whether it be Bates or someone else stepping in for Merrill. Like, there's going to be some uncomfortable projections that you have to live with just because you simply can't afford it anymore. And it's not so much, should rephrase it, it's that they don't want to afford that anymore. Dan can spend as much as he wants. So I think the thing we're not operating under is what that threshold is. Kobe kind of alluded to there's probably some limit they're willing to go to. Like, he seemed a little bit uncomfortable when he was asked about it. So I'm sure there's some threshold of what they're willing to pay. That probably also changes if they're in the finals. There's probably a higher threshold than getting knocked out in the second round for a second time. So that's probably changed their calculus. So there's nothing preventing them from spending other than just Dan and his willingness to spend. But ultimately, there is a finite amount of resources that you have to spend once you have players making the amount that Darius, Donovan, and Evan do. So there's only so many more dollars you can spend. And it's really, if they choose to move off Isaac or they choose to move off Dean, it's not that they don't want to pay them. It's they rather allocate those resources elsewhere. And so if you see an Isaac moved, maybe for a dump, it's probably to re-sign Jerome. If you see Wade moved, it may be to re-sign Merrill. So it's choosing who they may want to pay within the confines of what they can pay, more than trying to save money. But ultimately, they can re-sign all those guys, bring everyone back if they wanted to. But does Dan want that tax bill? Only he can answer that.
And for the people out there who may not have a clear understanding of it, does getting out of that second apron, let's say you move Isaac Okoro and whatnot in some type of salary clearing move, or you get up off of combo of Dean and Isaac, does that have, outside of the hard capping that could potentially happen, does it affect their ability to retain Ty? Does it affect their ability to offer him the money that they could potentially offer him?
The only thing it impacts is the Christmas gifts that Gilbert gets for his employees. If he's having to cut back Christmas gifts because he decided there's too much spent on the money, and that's the only thing it impacts. But no, so I mean, with Merrill and Jerome, the Cavs have bird rights, which basically say that there are certain amounts that they can pay them because they've stayed with the team for an X amount of years. With Merrill, there's really no limit what they can pay, and with Jerome, it's up to 14.1 million is basically kind of the rough number, is the most he can make next year if he stays with the Cavs. So that does not change. Their status does not change based off of the Cavs changing their cap status. That still remains the same. So no matter what they do, what they pay Jerome and Merrill still is that threshold.
Thank you for clarifying that. I've seen a lot of confusion in regards to that too. And the amount of money that Jerome is paid or Mara is paid, can you shed light on just how much the tax bill could look for every million that they are actually received? Let's say you pay Jerome that full 14.1 or whatever the MLE would be at that level. How much of a tax bill could Dan be possibly looking at? Do you know off the top of your head?
I think it was 80 million was the number. So, and one of the things they changed about the tax bill too is that it's a sliding scale. So the further and deeper you get into the tax, it's basically increments of 5 or 6 million. So every 5 or 6 million that you increase yourself in the tax, there is a new multiplier. So that sliding scale may vary depending on who they cut, who they shift. But say if the Cavs just want to re-sign Merrill tomorrow into a $14 million deal, that means $80 extra million that Dan's having to pay for Jerome. So if you're looking at it from Dan's perspective, is Ty Jerome worth that? Like, you can't blame him. I'm not going to tell someone else how to spend their money. But at the same time, if you're looking at it from that perspective, you can kind of understand why teams are taking the approach they are to the second apron, because it means that's probably not an $80 million player, right? So how you approach that changes, and that's why it's so important. It's who they want to decide to pay. So just, Evan Mobley's DPOY didn't get them into the second apron. It's a combination of things. It's Donovan Mitchell's extension kicking in and getting paid 11 more million. It's Darius Garland getting a raise to 3 more million. There's raises that occur. It's not just one event that's happened. It's a buildup and an amalgamation of events that happen. It's also trading for DeAndre Hunter and locking in his salary for the next 2 years, as opposed to having Levert come off the books and Yang at a much reduced rate. So it's a combination of things. So that's why it's really just kind of figuring out the right, Rubik's Cube of what looks good to you on your side as far as the combination of the money you have to spend.
I think that is very important for people to understand, and why it may force the Cavaliers to decide between Jerome and Merrill. And I have long had the opinion that they're going to lose one of these guys. I think nightmare scenario would be that they lose both. Hopefully that does not occur, but I think you have to retain at least one, because I just don't feel like you're going to be able to replace what they bring to the table on the veteran free agent market, like the veteran minimums that are very likely to be handing out, or in some low level trades that involve Isaac or Dean or anybody else on the roster. So this is a difficult spot to be in for Cleveland at the end of the day. And that's why you have people advocating to shed salary, whether that be Jarrett or Darius, but there are consequences to all of these moves that they make. And I think that a lot of people are kind of leaving that context by the wayside. But I'm going to pivot here. And I got to ask you this, because the Halliburton injury, it sparked a lot of sympathy for people. And you've seen some negativity in there too. But I just have to ask this. When it comes to player health, player safety, playing on these injuries that could potentially lead to even more devastating injuries, I get that it's a personal thing, right? As a fan, you probably want your guy to go out there and suit up if he's in the playoffs, no matter if it's the first round, the play-in, or the finals. But I think I'm getting to a place, dude, where it's like sometimes it may not be worth it. For the Cavaliers, Darius Garland, we already know the injury was more serious than at least the reporting made it sound like, and it necessitated surgery. For Halliburton, he got hurt on the biggest stage, and he is very likely to miss the 2025-26 season. Where do you lie on this whole conversation between whether or not a player should give it his all and just be out there no matter the circumstance, no matter the injury? Where do you fall in that camp?
So I think it's hard to say what another person should do with their body, because you don't know what their injury is. So my sprained ankle could be different from your sprained ankle. So for you to say yours is worse than mine, I don't know. Maybe a doctor can diagnose that, but I don't know.
Bodies respond differently. Yeah,
they do. And I think that subjectiveness of injuries is hard for people to grasp. I think we've also been kind of spoiled to an extent with LeBron. I mean, he was absolutely indestructible. Sprained ankle, whatever you want. Now he may, show like it's really hurting a lot, but in the end, he's going to play. And I think we automatically assume that athletes are going to play regardless, and that's perhaps unfair on them. Now, absolutely, I want my guys to go out there and give it their all and battle through things. But at the end of the day, for me to judge and say you should or shouldn't, I can't make that judgment, because I don't know what that person experienced. Even if they're diagnosed with something, it's hard to say. I think the other part of this, that the Cavs really have not done any favors to their guys as far as how injuries have been reported, which has kind of led to this. Like, I think the perfect example was this past playoffs with Steph Curry and Darius. But Darius, it was listed as day-to-day, which in my eyes, that was more so we really want him to play, so we're going to list it as day-to-day to see if he can recover quick enough, but really just play it by ear, because we truly don't know. When in reality, it was a much larger injury. If they would have come out from the get-go and said, hey, he's going to be out for 3 weeks, and if Darius goes out the next game, he's a hero, right? So I think if those expectations that they set, and then the lack of information creates a vacuum. When there's a vacuum, people fill that with whatever they want, and it goes crazy. And once it gets out of hand, it's hard to control. With Steph, you saw him come out right away. They said he's going to be out, what was it, like 3 or 4 weeks? And at that point, okay, you knew this was serious. I know the Cavs are very liberal when it comes to how they report that, but at the same time, they don't want to set an expectation there'd be a setback. But I think just being transparent and communicative about that. And unfortunately, the Cavs have not done the guys any favors now 2 playoffs. With Darius this playoff, with Jarrett last playoffs, because of how they've reported it, it's left a lot to be desired as far as just what the injury is, what it means, and it's put them in an awkward position. So, it's hard for me to say what a player's going through. I never want to judge because I don't think any of us know. But at the same time, I think the Cavs can do a little bit better as far as how they're protecting their players when it comes to what they're reporting on.
I completely agree with that. I think there is a fine line, right? I try not to, just like you're indicating, I try not to say and tell a guy, because obviously I can't do that. I'm a fan, but as much
You
as
could
I
tweet them.
want
They got
them,
Twitter handles.
yeah, I mean, yeah, let me just hit George up. Uh, there have been many occasions throughout these last 3 years where a guy has been hurt and you've wanted them to suck it up and go out there. But I've tried to have the understanding that, hey, like this is either a debilitating injury or they risk like further injury that could hamper them in the long term or affect next year's opportunity to compete. Luckily, we didn't get that with Donovan. Luckily, we're not getting that with Darius, although he's very likely to miss the opening of next season. And we didn't get with Evan Mobley or Sam Merrill or anybody else on the roster, but it could have happened. And I think that people are missing that. And just because these guys are professional athletes doesn't mean that they're not ultimately human at the end of the day. But I think the Cavaliers, as you're saying, they have not done their dudes any favors by leaving it so ambiguous or open to interpretation. Like put some, just make it. I don't even know what word to use. Just be blunt
Be
about it,
real.
right? Yeah, be
Yeah.
blunt about it. Be real about it. Just tell us, hey, can this guy actually play, or are we looking at him being out for this entire series, or he's going to miss a couple of games? I think if they were more direct in their statements regarding injuries, that you would probably see less of it. You're not going to get away with it get rid of it entirely, because you're always going to have fans that are going to talk down on these guys. But I think you can circumvent a lot of that by just being real and blunt about it. So it's nice to hear your thoughts on that, because it's with the Halliburton injury really sparked things in regards to it. It sucked to see that happen
Yeah.
in the finals, man.
I mean, that was right away. You can see that pop, and it's been
They
more of a
kept
common
showing it
occurrence.
too.
Eh, But I mean, to your point, this isn't Bill Belichick anymore. You don't need to say, we're on the next week, or not give any answer. Like, is there truly a competitive advantage that teams are gaining by saying that a guy is day to day? They're not being transparent about injury. The guys know. I mean, if they're out on the court, they know they got injured foot, so they're probably going to step on it. They got injured finger, they're probably going to smack it harder. Like that's just a matter of how you play. You know that. So I think if anything, they're just doing their guys a disservice in the court of public opinion, which they may say not matter, but at the end of the day, we're all human, and that impacts everyone. And I think one of the things too is just with how explosive and athletic guys have gotten, it's led to more soft tissue injuries. And with
Mhm.
soft tissue injuries, those are just so much more subjective. And it's easy to say broken bone, okay, well, yeah, you can't play, but with soft tissue, you get different grades, different severity levels, and with that come different subjective opinions. So with the increase in soft tissue injuries, I think you're just seeing just that explode even further with, okay, well, what should they really be playing through, in my opinion, because I've had this, or it's my viewpoint, as opposed to what they're actually experiencing. And that's a bridge probably never going to cross or be able to fully, comprehend.
That's a great point. I mean, I hope if they take anything away from what has happened over these last 2 seasons or so, it's to report more accurately or be more real about it. But before we get out of here, just going to take a couple of chats. Andrew Brandt says Jaylen Brown to Cavs, Garland to Celtics, Okoro Allen to Nets. Do it. Uh Man, these are big dreams, big thinkers right here. But what's the likelihood of you seeing that happen?
I mean, off the top, I mean, I can't remember what Jaylen Brown makes, but I mean, that's probably pretty close to doing it. But I mean, with the Celtics probably choosing to take a step back a year and acquiring Simons, I don't know if they're
Mhm.
really interested in that. Yeah, I'd be surprised if something of that catastrophic happens. If anything, I'd imagine the Celtics make a move like that, but they're probably sending Brown out west somewhere as opposed to another competitor with the Cavs, because once Tatum gets healthy, they're gonna have to play Jaylen Brown and go through the East Conference Finals. So they probably don't want that to happen. So
No.
I think one of the things actually this brings up is I think it's funny. One, for as much as some fans rag on Darius and Jarrett, they're also supposed to get us Jaylen Brown. At the same time, I think in a lot of these deals, teams value pick equity, and the Cavs don't really have pick equity. They have,
Yeah.
like a 2031 or 2032 first they can trade, which can be unprotected, and that can be kind of a some pick. But aside from that, a lot of these teams, they're trading a player like that, they're likely wanting some picks back. Now, there may be some kind of teams that want to move right away, but the Cavs really don't have that. It's probably going to be a value in a lot of these kind of bigger deals.
Yeah, I think that you can't open your mouth on one side and say, "Oh, Darius, Garland, and Jarrett Allen are awful, or they don't fit, or we need to get somebody that's better or less injury prone," and then throw out Jaylen Brown as the option, one of the 15 best players in basketball, 15 in that 15 to 20 range. I think you can't discredit these guys and then expect the return to be like some really heavy hitter. That to me always has cracked me up.
And no disrespect to Andrew, we respect the question, not taking this at you, just generic.
Yeah. Andrew, we converse a lot. He knows I'm just ragging on him. Kamart one says, "I'm tired of the George Niang disrespect. He's a winning veteran." Look, I talk to George pretty frequently, to be honest with you. We have had some good interactions, some bad interactions. He knows how I stand, how I feel about him. I think George is a solid role player. He has his clear limitations, but he's also somebody that he won't take no shit. That's definitely number one. He's a tough guy out there, and he has a very clear skill set. So never any disrespect on George.
What? You better be showing the StatMuse graphic where they show George Niang has more wins in the 2020s than just about the entire team. So respect to Georges.
Yes, respect. Elliot Clausen says, "Would it just be easier to dump Okoro? Why was no one talking about dumping Strus? He was horrific in round 2." Number one, I don't think Max was horrific in round 2. I think he had a horrific game, was game 5, but I think you asked him to do a lot in that series, a lot more than he probably should have been expected to do. And I don't know. What's the percentage chance that you think Strus has moved this offseason, Luca?
So one of the things I think is being more difficult to move is guaranteed salary. So, anytime the more guaranteed money you have on the deal is probably going to cost more. So Strus has 2 years left, just like Okoro, but he's owed about, I think, $8 more million over the course of those 2 years. So we're seeing some of the moves being made now. I mean, Chris Stapps took a significant talent step back and had to give up a second round pick to get Georges in the second round. But we saw Terrence Mann, who had 3 years, about, I think, 45, 48 million left, cost a first round pick. So, when you talk about parlaying guaranteed money, that starts to get into more significant, whereas Okoro is probably going to be cheaper to dump. He's also younger, so I think that probably plays into the calculus. Yeah, I mean, Strus could be viable to dump, but at the same time, Max is also probably a more key part of the rotation than Isaac is. Even if you're saying he wasn't playable in the playoffs, which I don't think is really true. I think he was actually one of the better performances they had.
Mm-hmm.
But he's probably more important, but also probably more expensive to dump, which is why Okoro probably is one of the names that get thrown off more often, because he's easier, he's more expendable. So it's not out of the realm possibility that Strus becomes that guy. But I certainly think from a just overall veteran perspective, he's certainly someone that seems like the locker room pretty trusts and respects highly. So I think just from the fabric of the team wise too, I think he's someone probably behind the teams that means a lot more than maybe some people realize.
Yeah, I mean, the fact of the matter is, Max is still a pretty versatile guy for what the Cavaliers ask him to do and the salary that he's on. Are you going to be able to replace what he does by dumping him? I simply don't think that's the case. You have to have a plan in mind. Yeah, I know we've talked about DeAndre Hunter starting, but if you move Max, you kind of create another hole that you are going to have to ask one of your young guys to step up into a role to fill, or you're going to have to go out on the veteran free agent market and acquire somebody on a vet minimum, which is always going to be a dart throw. So it's a risk.
And I think, I don't want to cut you off. I think you go to the next question, but I think one of the other things that brings up is another subjective part of this that I think a lot of these discussions are based on is Max Strus at 15 million worth that compared to Sam Merrill at 5 million, or is Ty Jerome at 10 million maybe 100% less salary wise, but 70% less effective, worth of Malcolm Brogdon on a minimum salary? Like what's that gap that you're trying to compare as far as this guy worth this amount, this guy worth this amount? Maybe they're slightly different in effectiveness, but is that step back in effectiveness worth that increased financial flexibility? So I think that's what a lot of these discussions are, is, if we move on from them, what is the alternative and what does that look like, effectiveness versus cost? So that's again, that's a calculus that probably subjective to each person depending how they view those players. But that's, I think, a lot of the discussion they're having is that if time moves on, is someone worth making 2 or 3 million? Maybe definitely a step back talent wise, but can we get a comparable productive level for a lot less and reallocate that elsewhere? I think those are a lot of the discussion you're seeing with Okoro, Wade, Jerome, Merrill, those type of players who could be shifted depending on what happens.
Fair points all the way around. Just, the domino effect that moving any one of these guys could have. That's what it all comes back to. Joseph Santos says, first trade Okoro and the 59th pick for Okogie, and then trade Wade for Powell, sign Ty Jerome for 40 mil over 4 years, sign Sam Merrill for 16 mil over 3, then sign Nance, Simmons, or Prince for wings. How do you like that as an offseason, Luca?
Man, I mean, I know Kenny Atkinson recruited Jared Dudley to the Cavs or the coaching staff, but it sounds like he's been doing a heck of a lot of recruiting to get Larry Nance, Ben Simmons, and Taurean Prince for veteran minimums. I don't think the trade's all that bad. I don't know if that's Norm Powell or some other Powell. If it's Norm Powell, it's probably a tall hill to climb. But otherwise, I mean, I don't think those deals that he proposed are anywhere outside of the norm. I mean, we did some historical comps for both of them, and Merrill kind of fell within that $4 to $6 million range just based off what other shooters got. Ty for $40 million is on the higher end, but certainly not an outlier. I think really the biggest thing is getting those three for veteran minimums. Are you're probably thinking about one, maybe two of them. I highly doubt they can get all three. If they get Larry, I mean, that would be, I think, one of the ideal scenarios if they get him on a veteran minimum. And to talk about a third big who would really fit with a lot of what they need, I mean, he'd be awesome. So don't think it's out of the realm, but I think that's expecting a lot to get that many productive players on a veteran minimum.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. There are videos up on this channel about Larry Nance Jr. and Ben Simmons. The people know how I feel about both of those guys. So I would be perfectly fine with both coming in, but selling them on the vet minimum, at least 2 out of the 3 would be a very difficult thing. You're talking about Dwight Powell. That's a difficult. I could see that possibly occurring on paper, but you would really have to maneuver some things around and maybe convince some people that trade works for them. Yeah, I mean, this would be a good offseason if we're going to retain the core 4. This would be a very solid solid move, but I just don't see. Go ahead.
No, for Dwight. So if it's for Dwight Powell, I think value wise and fit wise, I think it makes sense. We're trying to acquire another backup big, trying to move some money around, save some money. But here's the other thing with that. So the Mavericks are currently over the first apron by about 4.7 million, meaning they also cannot take back more than 100% salary. So even for
making like 4 or 5 some, right?
Yeah. So I think Powell's at 4, Wade's at 6.6 million. So even for a simple trade like that, the Mavericks can't do that. It requires a third team to get involved and say, "Hey, take this money and get something else." So just even like a small trade like that becomes a lot more onerous just because of the apron restrictions. So not saying it can't happen, not saying that it's too difficult, but it's just a perfect example of even something that kind of as small as that requires an extra step because of just the apron scenarios that everyone's dealing with.
And that is the name of the game right there, right? In order for the Cavaliers to make some of these marginal moves, you may need the assistance of a third team. You may need somebody else to get involved or do these things very, very creatively. And with the Cavaliers having a general lack of draft capital to kind of convince some of these teams to take on said salary, it's a difficult sell. And so that's just the place they find themselves in this offseason. They just started. We got a full slate of things to watch play out. Free agency hasn't even really hit. Draft coming up tomorrow. There's just a lot of decisions to be made, Luca, and I'm very interested to see what direction Kobe Altman takes this team in. Thank you for hopping on such short notice, man. I know it's kind of been a hectic past couple of days.
Yeah, no, it's always good talking ball. Definitely appreciate it. Your viewers are great. Do a lot of great work. So any opportunity to hop on with you and talk some shop is always a pleasure.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it. As I always tell you guys, if you'd like to reach out, you know how you can. It's Cavalier_pod on Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, and more. If you want to be added to the It's Cavalier Discord chat, you know what to do. Leave a rating, leave a review, send a screenshot of said review to itscavalier53@gmail.com, and I will send you said invite. Go Cavs.